Hello and welcome to Leadership as a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, video discussion 3. And this discussion is going to be on a portal episode. The portal is Eric Weinstein's podcast. And so it's portal number 6 where he talks to Jocko Willink. Now, this is a great episode about leadership. So you should go watch the video 100%. It's a couple hours long. And sort of the beginning and the end, we get to hear some really great, insightful questions and discussions about leadership. What I thought would be interesting is to do an analysis of Jocko Willink, just like we did with Marin Alsop. Because from everything that I can tell, Jocko Willink is a natural leader. And we're going to prove that by going through and using the concept, the theory, the hypothesis that we've developed in the original chapters, and go through and look at Jocko Willink and see if he's a natural leader or if he was trained, if he got taught all this in school. Jocko Willink, obviously, if you do not know by now, is former Navy SEAL. He's retired now, combat veteran, has written a couple of books on leadership and then some children's books. He's got a company that does a whole bunch of different things, leadership consulting and some other stuff. So clearly a 100% accomplished human being. I mean, very, very successful. But what I want to do is show the same stuff that Marin Alsop had, Jocko Willink has, in my estimation. What's also fascinating about this episode is Eric Weinstein clearly has spent a lot of time thinking about leadership and has some really valid questions. And so it's neat to see somebody who's thinking about these sort of things that is not a leadership type. In other words, it's a big thing. Anyway, not too much of this. We'll go right over to that. A couple of the clips are going to be longer than a minute. I like to keep them so that it's not like I'm stealing somebody's thunder, but I really like the interaction between the two of them. So we'll show the discussion and then do an analysis just like we did with Marin Alsop. All right, thanks so much for your time, and now we'll get right to the PowerPoint. Okay, so we will just get right into this one. So first of all, tons of respect for both of these gentlemen. Eric Weinstein's podcast, The Portal, you want to go think about some big things, that's the place to go. There's a couple of episodes that I've watched that have made me feel like I was the dumbest guy in the room. But it makes you think, and it gives you a lot of time to ponder some big stuff. And they ask some great questions on that podcast. So this one's great because he decides to sit down and have a discussion with Jocko. So as we discussed in the opening, we will go into the analysis of, is Jocko Willink a natural leader or was he trained to be a leader? As we said, one of the main things in the hypothesis is that it's a talent, leadership is a talent combined with the philosophy, an ideal philosophy, and then that's what makes a leader. So you can have somebody that's got the philosophy, they can have humility and integrity and empathy and vigilance and not have the talent, which doesn't make them a leader, just makes them a really good person. So we're going to go ahead and get right into that. So first clip we'll play is we're going to go through the 4 steps of the philosophy. So we're going to start off with humility. Here's a little conversation where Eric Weinstein asks, let me look over here what he talks about. Oh yeah, where he talks about what is it that made you, let's talk about humility because you discuss it so much. So we're going to go ahead and go to that link.
I have to tell people that the best advice is to constantly recalibrate the forces that are in opposition within your mind. Do you have any way of helping people in general with dialectics that need to govern them? I feel like, I thought it was beautiful what you said before about these inner city kids. So much of what I hear is people giving blanket advice, which has no sense of what listener it's finding. So, like you teach people to be humble, who are already humble, you're just cutting them off at the knees. Or if you teach people, you need to be assertive, and you've got somebody who's like wildly over aggressive, the person just takes it as license. How do we responsibly push out a framework for balance, which isn't mealy mouth, but really has full-blown versions of these opposing ideas within one mind?
So, great question. Eric Weinstein asks, hey, I always hear people giving an advice, but nobody's listening. Well, what is that, right? What's the answer to that? Well, empathy, vigilance, right? I got to understand what my audience is doing. I've got to pay attention to the message that I'm putting out. Great. So now we'll watch Jocko's answer. And I wanted that question to be in there because that just shows you the depth of thought that goes into this sort of stuff. So now we're going to hear Jocko's response.
Again, that's why this book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, we had to write it. Because we put the name on the first book, Extreme Ownership. We gave it that name. And that's a great concept when you've got people that don't want to take responsibility for things. Like, listen, you've got to take extreme ownership of what's going on. But it's like you said, when you give it that to someone that's already a micromanager,
right?
Oh, they're all of a sudden they're running with like what'd you say, a license? It's like they have a license now to micromanage.
Double O micromanagement.
Yeah. And they're wondering why things are falling apart on them and why no one has any initiative anymore and why they're having to make every single decision and why the frontline troops aren't maneuvering on their own. Well, it's because you're micromanaging them. Now you're micromanaging them to the extreme. So that is why we had to do it, because these things, as you said, you have to constantly modulate all these different balances, all these different dichotomies. You have to constantly modulate them. And by the way, once you get it modulated today,
right,
tomorrow it'll change a little bit.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, if you had no initiative, Eric, and I said, hey, listen, I might have been micromanaging you. I need you to step up more. And you go, oh, okay, cool. And the next day you show up and you start doing some project that I hadn't even authorized. And now I got to come back and I got to adjust, because now I got to tighten you up and say, hey, I want you to take initiative and I appreciate it, but you still got to stay within the bounds of what we're trying to get done. So I was right yesterday, and now all of a sudden, same mindset, I'm wrong, and I have to adjust again. So you're 100% spot on. You have to modulate all these principles for the people that you're dealing with and the situation that they're in.
All righty. So great points. So first of all, Jocko and his partner wrote a book called Extreme Ownership, then realized that they had a problem. So that's humility. Hey, we made a mistake. We wrote down, hey, here's the 4 principles you got to follow. And we made a mistake because then, he talks about a little bit earlier, everywhere they went and everything they did, they had all these questions about how to implement them. So, fantastic. Now, admitting that you're not completely correct, he's not wrong, right? The principles that he has in extreme ownership are sound, but he wasn't completely correct, right? He hadn't gone to the furthest level of analysis. So the great thing about that is, in extreme ownership, he talks about check your ego, which is be humble. So here he checks his ego, says we gotta go out and fix this problem that we made. This also shows integrity, because it's integrity with his approach about having humility. Now, the thing that he talks about a little bit there is, well, we've talked about it in other videos. Well, one day you go in and you have to attune the competence in the environment to get a job done. And then the next day you go in and the environment's changed, so now you have to change everything else. Or, we've said this before too, you might have to do 5 different things in 10 minutes. You might have to come up with a different, he says modulation. I think attune is because it's my word, but it's the same idea. You got to be able to do it all the time, consistently, with any situation. Every time that you're going to approach a situation, you've got to attune the competence and the environment and the goal. So clearly he has humility, because he talks about the fact that he made a mistake and is willing to admit it. A mistake is a strong word. Didn't go to the furthest level of analysis in his approach. All right, so next we'll have a little talk about empathy. Now I'm not going to play not going to play the clip from Eric Weinstein, but he comes up with this idea. We talk about you need to be a critical thinker. What about critical feeling? So, which to me is just having empathy. You have to empathize with other people. You can make random, harsh decisions all the time, but you have to be able to empathize with the bosses, empathize with the people, empathize with yourself, not sympathy, empathy. Go back to the definition that we talked about in the definition chapter of empathy. It's the philosophical thing where you have to be able to put yourself in that situation. Jordan Peterson talks about creating avatars with all these different situations and then going through the situation with that avatar. So we'll play the question about critical feeling is the question that Eric Weinstein asks, and then we'll do Jocko's response to that.
Do you relate to this concept of critical feeling at all? Does that sound like something that you have had to think about? Am I off base?
I have had to think about emotions a ton.
Yeah.
And what I have found with emotions is just like every other thing that we have as human beings, they can get out of balance. So if I have a leader that gets super emotional about every decision or flies off the handle or shows a bunch of anger and loses his temper, that is not going to be good. People will not respect that. People will not trust his judgment because they're emotional. So we can't go and be super emotional human beings if we're trying to be in a leadership position. And that includes in your house, right? If you fly off the handle with your wife or you fly off the handle with your kids, that is not going to be healthy for those kids. They're not going to trust your judgment. They're not going to respect you. How can they respect you when you can't control your own temper? And if they do respect it, that's actually scary because what you're teaching them is that in order to get respect, what you have to do is have a violent, crazy temper. So you don't want to be a super hyper emotional person. What's the other end of the spectrum? The other end of the spectrum is I've shut my emotions off completely. I'm totally and completely detached. I have no emotional connection with the people that I'm leading, whether they're on my team or in my family. And guess what? If I don't have that connection as a human being, as human beings working for me, they are not going to do what they need to do to accomplish the mission when they see me as a cold-blooded robot. So with these emotions, you have to keep them under control. I'm not telling people, and I don't tell people that they should be void of emotions.
Right.
Because if you're void of emotions, you're a robot, and people don't follow robots.
Okay, so what's that? Empathy, right? Got to make decisions. People need to know that you took them into consideration or that you took their existence into consideration. Because it's super easy. We've talked about it with management and systems and all this sort of stuff. Super easy to make a mechanical decision, but not when you're dealing with people. So here he is talking about critical feeling, which is empathy, right? You have to understand how people are receiving your message. Perhaps you do have to be super emotional. Perhaps you do need to be less emotional. Well, how do you know how emotional to be in different situations? Vigilance, because you got to pay attention, right? So if you're, as he talks about it, if you're going to be flying off the handle and being outrageous and losing your temper all of the time, then nobody's going to listen to you, one. But I've also said that it makes you completely ineffective because then if something really catastrophic happens and you do need to lose your temper, which is rare, then it has a much bigger impact if you've been calm, cool, and collected the rest of the time. And people also need to know if you walk up and say, look, I understand how you feel. I understand what's going through your head. I got to make this decision anyway. That's why I put down you must make decisions. That's the point of being a leader is that you have to make the decision. And sometimes some people are going to get hurt. But if you're able to sit down and talk to them, hey, I understand. I know what this is going to do to you, but I got to do it. And then you have to explain why. And you might have somebody who just gets it. Yeah, I understand completely. And then you don't have to talk all that. You might have somebody that needs a 5-minute explanation. Anyway, but here he is talking about it. Oh, yeah, here's empathy. So we got 2 of the 4 philosophical tenets, if you want to use that. Now next, I'm going to play a clip where it's sort of a combination of things. So we've got vigilance, and then we've also got the definition of leadership. And we're going to kind of unpack that and talk about it at a little bit of length. But the reason that I play this one, or that I say this one's got a couple of things in it, is it's about 1.5 minutes. And as you go through, you'll see what we're talking about. We're just paying attention, listening to what's going on, but then he also describes the the definition that we have decided on for what leadership is. What does a leader do no matter what? In any situation, what is the leader doing? Right? What is the core, what is the action or the thing that a leader is doing no matter what else is going on? Okay, so let's go to that clip.
But also the genius of improvisation, which is something I associate with our armed services in general, but also particularly with our special forces, where really brilliant stuff was hatched out and tried.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, the entire war for me in Iraq, which for me I only deployed twice, which is not a lot, but the adaptations that were made all the time was, I've often said that war is an exercise in creativity.
That's right.
Because you're constantly looking outward at the enemy. You're seeing what they're doing. You're seeing how you can adapt, what you can change, what you can overcome. You're looking at your own troops saying, okay, how can I lead them in a way that they understand what's happening, that they understand the value of what they're doing, that they're making the right decisions out there on the battlefield by themselves, and they've got to make a decision whether they're going to kill somebody or whether they're going to let them live. That's a 22-year-old sniper on a rifle with someone's life and death in their finger, and you've got to get them to a point. So how can I get that message? Yeah, combat is an absolute exercise in creativity, and which is one of the interesting things is, you talked about earlier about who gets promoted.
Right.
And certainly the person that conforms to what they're being told to do and they follow instructions, they're going to get promoted.
To a point.
They're going to do fine.
Yeah.
But they're not going to be exceptional. The really exceptional guys are the ones that look at the situation and say, okay, here's what I know what we've been told to do, or
Right.
here's what the doctrine says to do. Here's what we're actually going to do, and here's why we're going to do it. And so those are the people that you want to follow on the battlefield. And those are the people that truly step up and lead. And it's the same thing in the business world as well.
Who do you look?
Okay, so I ask everybody to remember that clip because we're going to use that. We're going to refer back to that one thing because he said a whole lot of stuff right there. And I've read both of his books, and that's not in any book, which I find fascinating. So vigilance, right? Look at the situation. Take the doctrine plus operational considerations and then make a decision. Those are the people that are going to be followed. So what's the difference there? He just said, you're exceptional if you take what you've been taught, look at the situation, and come up with a creative plan to go do that. People are going to follow that person. Okay, so what's the difference? How do you train somebody to be able to do that? Because you can train somebody, here's the checklist you have to follow, and they're going to go follow the checklist. And just like he said, those people will be okay. But are they going to be great? Are they going to be followed all the time? No, because that person is just running the business or running the organization. So this is where I say that there's a talent, because he just said there's people that do this and people that don't. Now, the one thing that we don't talk about, and there isn't a clip to show in here specifically, is integrity. Now, I am absolutely not saying that Jocko Willink doesn't have integrity. I think that he has so much integrity that he doesn't even think about it, right? And so every time that he says, like at the beginning, humility, I said this thing, found out we made a mistake, we had to go fix it, and I've told people that we made not a mistake. I keep saying mistake. We weren't absolutely correct on something. And then how do you know how much empathy you need to have? Well, you have to still make the decision, you still have to do your job, and you have to take care of your people. That's integrity, because you're still going to get things done. And then integrity in keeping an eye on stuff. Hey, we're going to get the job done. We're going to make sure we follow doctrine. There might be a couple of absolute rules that you can't break in the doctrine, and you won't break those rules, but you can bend all the other ones, right? So if we go through and look at this, and then if you listen to the entire interview and go watch some of Jocko's other things, he never talks about being taught any of this in school. He figured all this stuff out because he went, I wonder why, and started thinking. So he got the attention called to it on his own. In other words, going through his own process. So he's got humility, empathy, vigilance, and integrity. Like I said, don't have a clip for it, but you're not really going to find Jocko not having integrity. Everybody's heard the famous thing, he's up at 4:30 in the morning taking a picture of his watch showing that he's up doing gym time. And he works out all the time. It's fantastic. Okay, so conclusions. Like I said, please go watch this video because it's really great. I mean, it's really good. Conclusions. So he talks about combat as a creative enterprise, as is operating any organization, which is what? The definition. He goes, you got to take a look at the environment, what's going on with the mission, got to take care of the people, and then you got to achieve the goal. So a leader attunes competence and environmental hierarchies in pursuit of a goal. That's it. He just says the definition. Now, one thing that is a little myopic, we're talking about the military and then we talk about business. This can be any organization. This can be a church. This can be a choir. We talked about it with the orchestra with Marin Alsop. So creativity is taking here's the rules, here's what we have to do, or here's the environment that we're in. Now how can I creatively get this stuff done? And those people automatically get recognized, right? So cool, because combat, just like anything else, is sometimes we got to do things that are a little creative. So Jocko enlisted, was a communications guy in the SEALs, then went to officer school, and then showed up. I've never heard him tell a story. Now, I have not listened to every one of his podcasts, so let's be honest. I've never heard him talk about all of the great leadership training that he got in officer school. I went to officer school in the Army, and I learned two things out of the entire 16 weeks or whatever it was. So he rose through the ranks, but here he is talking about, he's got the philosophy down. He's got the definition down. Clearly, he's got the talent. I just don't know that he has sat down and thought about what is it that makes a leader able to function as opposed to somebody in charge. Because he just said it when he's talking about, hey, you got somebody in charge, that's a person that's doing the doctrine that they've been trained on. That's just an in charge. That's in charge-ship. And then leadership is, hey, I get this and I get that. That stuff's not suitable. We now have to go act, or we got to go do something different. And then the leader makes that decision. Right. So he reflexively talked about, we just said it, he just went through the philosophical tenets of the ideal leadership. Now, what's interesting is he talks a little bit about the dichotomy. There's going to be, this month's theme is going to be on Jocko Willink. So we're going to talk about the dichotomy of leadership and extreme ownership. And what's interesting is he talks about, he's sort of hinting at the idea that there's a philosophy that governs it, because the philosophy can be applied infinitely, whereas the four principles that he talks about in extreme ownership are a checklist. And then you try to do the checklist, and then the next book is, well, here's how you have to try to balance the checklist. Well, what's the next step is the philosophy. So clearly, right, I don't know that Jocko's done the Big Five personality questionnaire. But clearly he's open to experience, because he sat there and talked about, here's all the things that I've listened to. He's got a high intellect because he's thinking creative. So here we go. Not a musician, but still got the creative ability to solve problems based off of the tools that he has. So in my estimation, if we were to look at Jocko Willink, just from the stuff that he's saying and some of the stuff that he's written, he is a natural leader. He's not a trained leader. He did not go to some school that made him this way. He went through and had experience and all these times being in charge and making mistakes and all that sort of stuff. So that feeds back into the solution chapter, where we talk about how can we accelerate that? How can we find people like Jocko that are, when they're younger, and develop them by giving them wisdom at a much earlier age? Well, there you go. So like I said, 100% please recommend that you go watch this video. It's good. It's great. There's, like I said, the beginning and the end are the most focused part on leadership. In the middle, They're talking about Americans and war and combat and all that sort of stuff, which is still great. But I just found this to be a very interesting video. So that concludes this one. This month, I'm also doing a review of, like I said, extreme ownership and the dichotomy of leadership. So please stay tuned for that. And I will talk to you all later. Have a great day.